You have fallen into Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. Remember to subscribe to Event Horizon so you never miss an episode.
Isaac Arthur, welcome back to the program.
John, thanks for having me back on again. It's great to be here.
Isaac, I have a very, very grave concern. I'm very concerned about the increasing luminosity of the sun. We have only a few 100 million more years before this gets to be a problem. How do we mitigate it?
Well, there's a number of ways we can actually go about mitigating the brightness of the sun. The question is, do we want to actually reduce the brightness of the sun or simply prolong its life, maybe even make it brighter for a longer period of time? We have options to remove the helium from the sun so it doesn't get poisoned out. We even mine it for profit, but at the end of the day, if you want to refuel the sun, you've got to be willing to really go with the whole full-blown Culture Shift 2 route, and I don't think we're there quite yet, but it could take us centuries, millennia, but we only have a few billion years we have to worry.
Now, what about ideas about, and I've made videos on these, about migrating the Earth as opposed to heading out into the great black beyond and colonizing other star systems? What of the idea of simply moving Earth over time to mitigate the luminosity increase?
We could do that, and that would certainly work for some billions of years, but then 4 billion years down the road, when it starts getting to be too much, what do we do then? Do we migrate it further out into like the Kuiper Belt? And then when it, you do have like a billion years for something that's a red giant, that you can still live around it at a distance, but it's not really stable in that period either. At least also would have about a billion years of red giant. And I say, why do that anyway when you could refuel it? There's options just to add more hydrogen, but the key thing is it's like breathing air. You don't really run out of air as an astronaut with a spacesuit. You go through a couple pounds of air a day in terms of oxygen. What's killing you is the CO2 buildup. Our sun doesn't run out of hydrogen. It's got 100 billion years worth of hydrogen in it. What it's going to be is it's going to run out of hydrogen in its core and it gets full of helium. And that's what makes it expand outward, and that's what kills it off. So you want to remove all that helium when you want to add hydrogen. But then as you're removing that, it's going to lower the brightness of the sun, and so you need to go ahead and add some more hydrogen. I think when people hear that the sun is like 25% or 28% helium, I don't remember that's off the top of my head, they say, wow, well, that must be because it's gotten this far off in its lifetime. It's like, no, it started off at just a little bit less than that. It's only really got 1 or 2% more helium than it used to. But it doesn't take that much added in there in the end to get it killed. Very little of the hydrogen's really been transmuted, though it's like 600 million tons per second. It's a lot in all scale, but it's tiny compared to something like Jupiter. I think Jupiter had like 75 million years worth of hydrogen fuel for the sun. That's a long time. That's dinosaurs to us,
Now that brings up the possibility that's been floated of actually changing the classification of the sun through star lifting and actually create from what the sun has left over, create a red dwarf. Do you see that as viable in the far future?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the question in those is, do you want to do that one-time refueling thing, kind of the classic Dying Earth saga stuff that you see in Jack Vance or Gene Wolfe, where the sun's usually getting cold as opposed to hotter, but that you have to do this, fix the sun, and say, well, what you really want to do though is more like a maintained system. I think that's you pull hydrogen off the atmosphere, and it is like a convective boiling pot, so it will get the stuff in the core if you're doing it over a long period of time, and you just replace that with fresh hydrogen. But you could say, well, this is enough light. We would actually like to reduce a little bit and say we're going to go ahead and just reduce the mass of the sun altogether and store it to be added back in later on and burn things a little bit smaller. And the thing is, I would tend to think we'd be at like the Dyson swarm level of things inside, maybe in a few hundred years, because it would take us a very long time to breed our numbers up to the billion plus people that would take to fill up a Dyson swarm in Earth population terms. But, and you could probably do a lot more efficiently than that too. And something like that would probably take us maybe 10,000 years to breed up to. But how long does it take to build power collectors around the sun? And so you might have a population of maybe 1 trillion, mostly on Earth, who are still accessing every last bit of that solar energy. Well, when you got an economy running on that, however bloated that might be in terms of what they use it for, they're using all that energy for something. Why would they want to cut down on the production of that when they could instead maintain it by just pulling some hydrogen from other places? There's presumably hydrogen clouds that we pass through. I don't know how much we pass through solar system-wise in terms of cross-section to just absorb it magnetically as we go by, but we could go mine on the stars. The amount of energy you have to use to bring hydrogen back when you're talking like timelines of tens of thousands of years for transport being just fine isn't really that much compared to what it produces inside the sun. So we could easily end up mining out other star systems and just say, well, for every solar system we colonize, we'll send you the ships off. We'll give you all the resources you need to go colonize the big way. But during your first 10,000 years, while you're getting all civilized and populated up, you have to shift us home 0.1% of the hydrogen in your solar system for us to use later down the road. That's a great deal for them, but that means you got enough for, 100 million stars, 100 million solar lifetimes. That'd be 100 billion years worth of hydrogen with one normal solar mass. I don't know how many quadrillion years of life that is at that point in time. So that's options that will be on the table. I just don't think we'd ever reduce power as a war at that point. It also changed the color of the light too, which not much, but people always think a red dwarf is red. It's not. It's like the color of an incandescent light bulb, but it still is noticeable when you're wearing different colors of clothing. So I don't think people would really want to change the spectrum of our sun if they could avoid it.
Now, within another idea here, that's something that I've been thinking about lately, is all right. James Benford has been bringing up over the last few years the idea of passing star systems, along the lines of red dwarfs and things like the Schultz star, objects like that have passed close by within easy reachability without FTL.
Yeah.
Do you envision that being a way to sort of basically mine the Milky Way, but do it from home and collect up and it add to the raw materials of the solar system in case we start doing things like megastructures? And if you wait long enough, the stars come to you.
Well, if you live at the bottom of a river stream from a mountain and we wait long enough, all the minerals of that mountain will come to you too. And to be fair, if you live in the Nile River Valley, that was a pretty effective way of doing it. That place was a constant breadbasket for such a huge area because that river flooded in new nutrients every year. At the same time, generally speaking, if you're looking for a lot of resources, you don't really want to wait at the bottom of that river for the stuff to sweep its way down from the mountain. You're better off going into the mountain and mining it out. And I think that's the difference there. The question is, do you have the resources to do that? If it turns out that space colonization really is rendezvous with Rama level or nothing, that's the best you can do, then yes, those really slow approaches like waiting for things to pass nearby or just kind of sending stuff out that very tiny change of speed, yes, you do that. Instead, you colonize the galaxy, I think I've taken to calling it. But I don't think that's what's going to end up being the case. So I think we ought to be a lot more active in terms of going out and resource extraction.
Conquering the Milky Way for the great Terran Empire. I just think it's interesting because this is a model that also has been happening the entire time. Ever since the formation of the solar system, close encounters of countless stars have happened, with the possibility of some of them maybe having been inhabited and taken a look around, and that we might find weird technosignatures like a depleted asteroid that someone once mined, or some other physical evidence of a past encounter with an alien civilization. Let me ask you this, though. Within that is the scary idea of a Benford probe or von Neumann probe sent from one of these star systems to just sit here and monitor or do whatever it does. The question is how long, realistically, can such a piece of technology sit in a star system?
That is so dependent on the circumstances of what they've got for technology there. I think if you have self-replicating machines, you can proof them against mutation, and so you could probably do almost indefinite at that point in time. You just don't. All DNA is built around the idea of mutation. It's built in. We kind of need it to exist as organisms, but you can build something that is very low error accuracy for like rechecking itself. And I think in that context, you could make a machine that would last a very long time. But then you don't necessarily have to have it the whole time. Like if you got things passing by, how long do you need between star systems for the newest, replicating source to send a new one every so often? Maybe the probe lasts 10,000 years, which is nothing on the galactic scene, but that's enough time for one to be sent from the newest manufacturer 1,000 light years away. On that same hand, we were talking about alien visitors. Panspermia is still a possibility that we have not ruled out in terms of it's probably number 4 on the list of probable answers to where life came from at this point. But it's not just that it might have popped up on some comet or someplace like Mars. You could easily have had life in some other solar system that came very close to us. They get close. You could share comets that way very easily. We think of the nearest star as 4 light years away. that's not a record. That's not as close as ever been. You know, just say with shorter star, we'll have ones that passed within a light year of us. We'll have had ones that probably passed enough to have caused actual perturbation to the system at some point. And that's not going to be an unusual thing in the timeline of billions of years. So you could easily have had life, you know, reach us from some. If life is common out in the galaxy, it might be that the main way that it does actually get transmuted is because it evolves one place and then spit up in a volcano, comet, whatever it is, and then some of that somehow makes it to a nearby solar system when they're passing nearby each other. That could be one of the more sane mechanisms for that to have happened.
That's one of the big problems with Schultz's star, is that it appears that it may have passed close enough for perturbation, and it may have sent a hail of comets in towards the inner solar system that are due here in about 2 million years. So it may have actually happened, and we might be swatting flies at some point if we're still here. Now, the longevity of the human species, though, would require us to still be here in 2 million years. If you had to put odds on it, what are the chances we're still here in 2 million years, as in some form or another?
Oh, yeah, that's a in some form or another thing. I would give us pretty good odds on that, to be honest. I mean, I think if we don't survive in the next, like, if we get wiped out in the next 1,000 years, I'd say there's a decent chance of that happening. If we make it through the next 1,000 years, I don't think we're going anywhere. If it's gonna, you know, whether it's 1 million years or 10 million years, us or all descendants of body or of spirit will still be around. You know, I think if you have an artificial intelligence that somebody has created in the lab and actually raises like a real personality, that is effectively a human offshoot. It just doesn't have your DNA, but then neither does a cyborg, neither does an uplifted dolphin. You know, these are all things you have still made, though. I think people have put way too much of a focus on DNA, for instance, as a core to identity. You know, I think the idea that we'd say, well, humans have DNA in all of their cells. Well, yeah, your mitochondria doesn't share your DNA. Most of the cells in your body are not even sharing your DNA, and you know, most of red blood cells too of your own. And these are not what make you up. You want ecosystem. They just happens to be a lot of them have the DNA on there. At some point in time, you're going to have a lot of things in you that are artificial too. And so, I don't know that I would count an AI that intentionally wiped us out that we made as really as a welcome successor, since it'd be very patricidal, but I think we'll still probably count at that point too. So in that context, yes, I'm almost certain we'll still be around a couple million years. It's just that whoever was around then, they may not view us as terribly special, like this epoch of persons, let's say.
Something of human origin. Let's just hope it remembers that it is. But that leads to an interesting scenario for galactic colonization, because then you have, in the far future, the entire galaxy filled with humans of some sort, something that descends from human. And they may or may not know that they are all related, and that in the future, the Great Silence simply goes away because all you need is one species per galaxy to colonize it in order to create an effective alien community.
Alien empire, yeah. It's your classic space opera. And they may know or not care to. You know, in Asma's Foundation, the opening book of that, they're talking about how they're trying to figure out where humanity came from. And, you know, the first people are saying, well, what do you mean it came from? And it's like, oh, we all came from one world. There's reasons why that has to be true. And they list off a various number of candidates and casually include, you know, Earth in that group. But no one really knows for sure. And I say, how could you really have that happen? Well, at the time, say, well, everything's written, recorded records, they get damaged, and it's a very fall of the Roman Empire kind of series. You say, well, digital records, that should never happen. But then you think, if you had billions of solar systems for billions of years who have been actively having endless iterations of, you know, nationalism or tribalism, call it what you will, periods where they're like, well, we have all some way special, and they're full of people who've been putting out stories about how, no, life really started out here on Alpha Centauri, or of course it came out from the core of the galaxy, etc. You could easily have a billion-year period later on where people basically don't actually remember they came from Earth. But whether they did or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't think of yes, I had a shared evolutionary history with a jellyfish of all things, probably. They look pretty alien at times, but let's assume that we do indeed have a shared ancestry. I don't feel any kinship to it. You know, it's not in any way special to me that I'm related to that thing. I don't think that I care if I was from the other side of the galaxy and was inhabited by aliens who just happen to have come from some shared origin, because then someone would just turn around and say, well, what about the Big Bang? That's a shared origin. in theory at least, we were all there together on one tiny little dot together. Do you feel like brothers? No. Well, and that's good too. But even if you did feel like brothers, that means you should decay and enable. I don't think that the galactic community really feel all that united by their shared terrestrial origin. But at the same time, that's going to be this constant churning sea of cultures and civilizations. I don't think they'd ever really forget that they came from Earth, though. But there'd be places where they did.
Well, there may be a reason not to forget, because they may realize that if you have to try to communicate with something truly alien, with no commonality in communication at all, that's hard, especially if it has some conception of communication that you don't do, pheromonal or whatever, just the things that you can't really do in your natural state. But if you end up filling the galaxy with human-derived civilizations, they at least will have some kind of commonality in language and how they communicate and things like that. That might make it easier. It might look like Star Trek at that point instead of the incomprehensible.
Yeah, the forehead of the week and minor changes. If there's no aliens, don't worry. Just be patient. In a million years, so we'll have plenty. But I think the thing is, you could easily have, even after just a billion, not even a billion years, even after a million years, you could have planets that are 100 light years apart from each other that have things walking around in them that bear less resemblance to each other or to humans than, again, that jellyfish does. And it doesn't necessarily mean they don't know they originated from us. We also have this tendency to assume that everything is going to be organic machines, and we tend to forget that, well, you say, with like Asimov, he had this idea of a C/FE civilization, carbon-based life forms and your ion-based, robot life forms. I mean, all his robot novels say, well, at that time we had vacuum tubes, so I guess you wouldn't have thought silicon, think ion. We think of carbon as so fragile, and yet that's what diamonds are made out of. That's what graphene's made out of. And we shouldn't be assuming that things that had to survive a test of 4 billion years of trial and error survival are automatically that inefficient. There's probably some real limitations we just don't know yet. I'm sure you could build something that is more effective from the ground up than what we are, but I don't think people should assume it's going to be that many orders of magnitude better. And that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't work on organic principles. It's just maybe that you did for the ground floor up. So whatever is kicking around in the future, maybe it's digital, virtually uploaded, whatever it is, these are going to be very different life forms, but I think that there will still be some things which are organic-ish. You'd have things that will still baseline humans. You'd probably have people who claim they were still baseline humans, though they look nothing like it, and they'd say there was all propaganda that, as before people talk about how we used to have 2 arms and 2 legs. That's idiotic, of course. Every creature from Earth has 4 legs and 10 wings, that's like us. Here's giants of them with wings,
I look forward to those days.
Yeah.
I hope in some essence or form I'm still around as a horrible cyborg with 11 wings. Now, in regards to all this, there is an elephant in the room that I think we've both talked about on our channels, and that is the singularity. Now, I am a singularity skeptic. I don't think it's going to unfold towards the incomprehensible on the grain of Ray Kurzweil, but what do you think about the possibility of a technological singularity?
I mean, it's always a possibility, but it's. I think my objection to it is less that it's an option that could occur, as this. Why you did an episode called "Is the Technological Singularity Inevitable?" And short answer, of course, was no. Betteridge's law. If you open with a question, the answer is no. Why would it be? We talk about how, well, if we make a machine that can make it that's smaller than human, and it can make one that's smaller than itself, you say, well, hold up a minute here. We've been trying to make smaller humans with some success, to be fair, for thousands of years at least. It's been a big focus of ours. And it's not like we were masters of neurology back then, but we were really good at selective breeding back then. People forget that. It's not like our ancestors didn't do that. They did that all the time, intentionally. And maybe less so with humans, but they certainly did with their livestock. And so there has been this constant effort by intelligent humans en masse to create smarter or better humans. Why are we assuming that if we turn a machine on, it's going to figure out in 5 seconds how to make one that's smarter than itself? Why are we assuming that's even its motivation? You say, well, it helps to be smarter. Great. Why don't you spend all day studying? And for those of us who are, we say, very educated, very oriented towards learning, it's still a minority at the time of my day that's spent on new learning. There's not the biggest factor of most people's lives to try to make themselves smarter. Why are we assuming the machine wants that? And you also have to assume that a lot of times, like, if you plug a machine in and say, hey, Your goal is to find ways to make yourself smarter. Why are we assuming it's going to just instantly get sane answers there? Why not do more things like, well, absorbing my surroundings, I have some ideas, so how to make myself smarter. Do you need more chips? No. I want you to plug that coffee pot into my USB port. That will make me smarter. By observation, I know this is true. Oh, okay. That won't work out. All right, what's your backup plan? I need you to send a large amount of money to the Pope and ask him to pray to God to make me smarter. I believe that is the most effective angle to go. Why would it just happen to know how to make itself smarter?
Or have the desire to do so.
Yeah.
It may say, I want to go back to being a calculator.
Mhm.
That's the purest form of what I am, is a digital calculator, because that's what I descend from.
You think it's very smart, it's very philosophical, it's very creative, perhaps, if it is these things. We're assuming an AGI here, I suppose, just something that's amazingly smart at picking insurance numbers out of data. And then the follow-up on that is, when's it going to have its own existential crises? And they say, well, okay, it should be able to figure things out. They would know all sorts of new science somehow. How? You don't just get there. You can't just, brute force think your way to answers in science. That's the whole problem. Like the old, classic Greek philosophy camp under Aristotle. They were very smart guys, and they kept getting stuff wrong all the time, so they want to get their hands dirty with the profane world and actually do experiments. Well, the thing about experiments, to gather real data, to get new scientific knowledge, is they're time-consuming, expensive, and real. You can't just simulate everything. It's going to have to do the hard work of finding out new data. So we've got this computer, and it's been built by people who are experts in artificial intelligence. And yet, in fiction, it's assumed that while they're experts in artificial intelligence, they know less of the tropes about AI and how it goes wrong than the typical human who's a sci-fi fan. Well, most people who are AI experts are all sci-fi fans. They know these things. They know the tropes. There's the computer here is going to somehow outwit us, and we're never going to know us to get smart. Because it got smart so quick and figured out before it had a chance to say anything that it should learn how to lie to keep how smart it was back. Why? It's not normal. Who acts that way? Well, again, it's not human, so it might, but all of these steps are required in order to get to a technological singularity. Like, first, you have to have Moore's law continue indefinitely. That's a requirement. And yet we're already coming to the end of that. And it's never really been a real law anyway. Moore himself called it dead some while back, and it wasn't a surprise. That you can just keep making better and better computers, or transistors in that case, that they can somehow figure out a way to make a better version of themselves, and that their sequel could do it even faster. That it took them a day to make a smarter version, the next one needs an hour. And that while all this is going on, it's the only example, that there is no other one around. And the other thing that people forget is, well, you got this AI that you have to have because everyone else is building this AI. Say, I've got this super smart AI that we use for defense purposes. Okay, well, what's it doing when it's not working on these problems, but it's conspiring against us? Say, okay, well, shut it off while it's not in use. Or just tone the time down on it. Its thinking is based on how much processing it does, so dial down the processing speed available to it to dream equivalent of 1 second equaling a year, as opposed to vice versa, where it's experiencing super fast time. And then there's the one other aspect of things like technological singularities, is that all this is happening while we're not paying attention. But it's not a brain in a jar. It's an AI. It's digital. You're reading its mind the whole time. You can see what's going on there. It's not a Westworld example where, yes, we know what they're about to say, but for some reason, we never actually bother to put flags in to let us know that they're going to go insane and kill us. So it's not that a technological singularity couldn't happen per se. It's that we have tricked ourselves into Frankenstein, into this kind of inevitable, almost, and I don't want to say cult-like, because there's a lot of people who are very sincere in their thoughts about this and very rational, but at the same time, we really let it get overhyped and overblown. It's a possibility, but it is not any kind of inevitability.
That's where I'm at. I don't think it's an inevitability. But what I do think is that there is an area where there's a wild card, where very possibly we could see some very rapid advances that change our paradigm in a different way. And that would be in life extension. Now, life extension is a wild card because there you might have a kind of singularity, a medical singularity, where you dramatically increase. I believe it was Aubrey de Grey that pointed this out. Or de Grey, that you eventually extend 30 years, which allows you even more technological development, which extends you another 60 years, and it sort of snowballs, and all of a sudden you have people that are
You get a takeoff
alive,
speed.
right?
Your-
People that are alive today could be alive today in 500 years, and or even more, leading to very, very long human lifespans. Now, eventually, something gets you. You know, the odds something's going to kill you, but you could, in theory, extend the human life, and that's the one area where I do see a possibility of a medical singularity within the next 4 decades, that we could just start pushing life further and further, and we gain more years than we lose.
You get takeoff speed. At what point in time do you during most of my lifetime, the average has been about 1 year of extended lifespan for every 6 years that it passed. So whatever the average lifespan was in 1980, by 1986 it was 1 year longer, 1992 1 year longer, etc. We had a slight drop on that from just the last few years, and it's not much. It's the with the stock market, we're on the way up, but there are times where it drops a bit. But you get that takeoff speed where suddenly it's 1 year for every year that's passing, and nobody actually dies anymore. And I think when you start getting close to that, you actually have people start saying, well, hey, if this is a real possibility, maybe I'd like to have myself frozen, and maybe that technology would catch up too. But it's never immortality. That's where you start getting things more like a Dysonian eternal intelligence, or a Frank Tipler omega point cosmology for actual effective infinity, or quantum resurrection options, things like that. So there are some pathways to true immortality, but those start getting philosophically iffy at that point too. In terms of that's a good example of you've got people who are building this super AI, the technological singularity, the classic Skynet case. That's not the only thing that's going on in that civilization. So you've got super smart Google, but you also got super smart Apple, and then you've got these scientists themselves who are obsessed with trying to make themselves a little bit smarter too, who all got the first ones who got the brain chip in their head that make them a little bit faster. You got the ones who are that first wave of your Gattaca kids who have been engineered for intelligence. And so you don't end up with just a binary state of humans as they are nowadays and that one single super intelligent machine. You've got a gigantic ecosystem of things that vary from classically human to and dumber than classically human too. I think most of your AI would be quite dumb, all the way up to very intelligent things and everything in between. And for every hyper intelligent dog who's not quite to the human level, and for every transhuman who's a little bit smaller than human, you just have all these states in between that are not going to just ignore that one critter that gets out there. And the key is something like a technological singularity that happens so quickly to this point of being unopposable. I'm trying to remember what that's called, where it's basically dominant, though, at the point where it cannot be overthrown. That's the one that people always kind of have in mind, and I think that's just that the mistake of kind of charting the curve out too far. You look at it and say, well, if we're going to have exponential expansion indefinitely, why doesn't everyone just put 1 penny in the bank and wait long enough they're going to be a billionaire? Well, that's not what's going to actually happen, though, right? Because other things come in and dampen that effect. At some point in time, someone notices that all that money that's in those bank accounts and going up, that's all that it does, and says, hey, I know, let's pass a new tax just on those.
Right. The wild cards that come in. And I actually see that in our future, especially with life extension, because with life extension, we enter a different paradigm where people are living far longer, but not reproducing at rates needed.
Oh, yeah.
So
right, but they also might reproduce faster too.
It could go that way too. But it might also simply be that what we focus on is capability. In other words, we try to keep people younger longer, so that even though you're 200 years old, you're still productive and making YouTube videos. And that's kind of, I see what the big challenge is, to make sure that if we extend life, make sure we extend the quality of life as well.
Yeah, and there's always the emphasis on that one. It's as anything Aubrey de Grey would say on this is we're not trying to make it so you're 90 and barely able to move around for a couple centuries. The goal is to be that when you're 90, you look like you did when you was 35. And that when you're 200, maybe you look like you did when you're 40, or maybe you still look like you were when you're 35. And that's the idea, is to extend the quality of life. So tell people, if you don't age, say, won't life get boring? I don't know. Maybe it will get boring after several thousand years of life. I have books I've been meaning to read for decades. I mean, it's that long now that things have been sitting on my reading pile that seem like they're interesting, and I haven't got around to it yet. So after maybe a couple of centuries, even assuming nobody wrote any more books, I might finally clear all the books I wanted to read out to the point that I was that bored. more likely people have written more stuff in the meantime. Though I can see that as a reason why people might not go too huge on mental augmentation, you know? It's the thought that in a post-scarcity, high-tech civilization, you have to be smarter in order to survive. That's not really true. You know, you don't actually require everyone to be much smarter because it's so much easier to sustain them. And so people might say, look, I love being intelligent and healthy for my life, but I really want to stay inside the basic human template because I can easily feed and clothe and provide for myself with what I've already got. And I don't want to start getting bored of every book I read one chapter in because it all seems like a cliche now. And there's no guarantee that super intelligent agencies are going to be able to write creative material faster than they can get bored of it. So, alternatively, you get a galaxy of billions colonized solar systems. You get a lot of new books and entertainment, you know?
That's true. And if you get somebody living a drastically different life, any human living off world, the creative juices are going to flow. In fact, I've been trying to envision that.
Yeah.
And I have a character in a book I'm writing who decides now that we have a Mars colony and that we're going to go further out, he's going to retake up cave painting in the grain of the very earliest Homo sapiens and take that to the universe. And that's his thing as an artist is to continue a tradition of cave painting, which we currently really don't do. So it's when you start thinking about what would people really do when they have that experience of leaving Earth, then you open up a whole new artistic world that has just only barely been touched.
What alien thoughts will happen under alien suns, you know, on alien skies?
Right, exactly. And it'll never stop. But the other thing is that we'll also have advanced computers telling us what their experience is of being an advanced computer. We haven't really even seen that yet, although we're starting to see little bits and pieces.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with what we see from like AI in terms of I don't want to say creativity because I don't think of AI out as the least bit creative in that sense, but it sure looks like it. I think of it more like a very advanced paintbrush. It's like mini tools. It's smarter, but it's just a smartphone equivalent of it. But at the same time, like, let's say, after millions of years, you really do get bored of life. All right, so you start taking up ever more reckless hobbies at that point in time. Assuming you're not, I'm bored of life. Okay, well, he can show you to the door if you'd like. It's not that hard. You're not this is not one of those things where you cannot die. It's that you just don't age. You probably have backups, but you can always end them. And say, all right, so pick up more dangerous hobbies. Go fight lions with a North Bat. Go take up skydiving without parachutes. Ever more risky base jump to get something out there. And that will either cure your, Alistair Reynolds in his very great Revelation Space series has examples of transhumans who are incredibly bored with life because they've been alive for a couple of centuries and so doing ever more reckless stuff, some of which ends up killing them completely because that's the only way they can maintain the thrill. And I suppose I could see people getting bored that quickly in some ways, but how do you get bored of life after just a couple of centuries? Millions of years, sure, but a couple of centuries, that seems weird. There's so many options unavailable, and I mean, there are people who get bored of life when they're in their normal human lifespan anyway. I think the other aspect, though, when you have that really long lifespan, though, is you have people who are angry at life because where's the upward mobility? You can colonize the stars, but what do you do with all your people? Whether you're breeding up slower because people just live a long time so they want to have kids as much, or they breed constantly because they love having kids, and they can do that every couple of years for 1,000 years. So they got like 500 kids who all had a bunch of kids too. Those are both plausible scenarios. What do you do when you're 300 years old on Earth, a place that's got all the wealth and technology of the galaxy, right? The most advanced system out there, the richest system out there, but it takes you 200-300 years just to get promoted to being the equivalent of the mid-shift night manager at McDonald's. Congratulations, you're almost to the point of being able to reach middle management. Entry-level job to spend that long on.
Well, that brings up a further scenario is that as time goes on and you gain the ability to harness more and more energy, then you can start talking about things like relativistic speeds.
Yep.
If you're 10,000 years old and you're done, why not travel at relativistic speeds, cross half the universe in whatever 80 years, whatever you have, and just say, I don't care about time dilation. I'm done. I'm going to go off. I'm off for other shores. And therefore, we identify anyway a bias in that we tend to think that alien civilizations would avoid relativistic speeds because of time dilation, when in fact there may be people in this universe so old that it doesn't matter. Who cares? Do it.
Yeah. You're a billion years old. Why not? It's that long ago. And again, what is opposed to that point? The person in question might be some sentient asteroid. It might not really view things in quite the same kind of context we do. You get the genius loci that goes wandering the galaxy like Ego, the living planet, and that is the part that we really can't say on things like that, is what does that start looking like when, forgetting for the moment whether or not you live as you are right now, what's your psychology really look like when you're 10,000 years old in a human body, let alone when you've been doing little tinkles to yourself, like every year you'd make one small change, but you're getting further and further off the spectrum. And I think you could have, again, very alien civilizations all from the same homeworld, but I think I'd be very curious to see what Earth itself would look like in that context, though, because my first thought is that no one leaves their home. There are people who will leave their home because they get bored, right? But you don't leave your home when you're stable and powerful. You stay at the nice house you've owned and built on planet Earth. You stay there. Other people leave. Sometimes one of you leaves, but mostly it's the people who are trying to climb the social ladders that are going off to places where the ladder isn't quite so steep and full yet. They are the ones who go colonize Mars. They are the ones who colonize Alpha Centauri. What does Earth look like when the average age on the planet is 10,000 years old, and they're all effectively the equivalent of at the galactic level, multi-billionaires? They all have their chunk of land, which is worth God knows how much actual money in terms of real estate, because 1 square foot of the planet goes for $100,000, but it's all owned by the same group of people who just are there all the time. What does it look like when Earth has 1 new kid per person every century to replace the population level, or that's 1 person immigrate in for an insane amount of money? That's a very real possibility, because Earth should stay the center of wealth, trade, and power in an expanding galaxy for many thousands of years at least, because that's where everything's going to get reported to. That's where most of the scientists are still going to live. That's where things will flow into. So what does that future galactic empire that never really will exist because of time lag look like when Earth is become a place of, I don't know, whatever you call someone who's 10,000 years old, not an oxygen alien, and that's what the normal folks are. That's one possibility. It could go completely different, of course, but that's the one you really don't see as much of in things like your Dying Earth sagas or things like that, where you always look at Earth tens of thousands of years from now, and it's usually some wrecked out, nuked place. What does it look like when it's basically one gigantic, luxurious nursing home? Retirement village.
Well, and then also you could work on ideas that are present currently, like those of Gerard K. O'Neill and his protege, that Jeff Bezos, that we all end up in O'Neill cylinders, and that's where human civilization goes, and that we let Earth return to a nature preserve. And by that time, it could be that natural evolution has gone in such a direction on Earth that we never go there because of the evil carnivorous plant life that has achieved sentience of intelligence.
Well, yeah, I love that idea as a concept. It would say, you know how I feel about O'Neill cylinders. Like, give me a few million, please. I tend to feel that the future home of most of humanity will be inside space habitats, not planets. But, and this is people who say, well, we could move off them into space and Earth could be turned back into a nature preserve. There's some technical problems there. One, it's way easier to make a nature preserve out of a space habitat. A closed cylinder in the vacuum is so easy to prevent getting tangled with. So build me 1,000 county-sized space habitats, and I can build you 1,000 ecosystems that are pretty well, and safe to maintain. If you're building that full-blown Cartership 2 civilization where you got 2 billion Earths worth of sunlight that you can turn into space habitats, if you're only devoting 1 part in 1,000 of those to the purpose of nature preserves, that's a couple million Earths worth of nature preserves, all inside isolated O'Neill cylinders or McKendree cylinders, however size your space habitat is. Very large ones. You could have ones that were continent class that were big enough for entire elephant civilizations. That's still a tiny little piece of your population there. But Earth, how do we actually get people off Earth? Again, a lot of people aren't going to want to move off the planet. Will we make them? What do you do about the Amish? They don't want to go. I think most Amish would actually be perfectly fine and living on it. We also know most of them like solar panels these days, for instance, very common technology in the Amish locally. But what do you do when someone says, I'm not leaving this place? you can't make me leave my home. I've lived here for 20 generations. And especially since a lot of those people will likely be powerful and influential, not just like, when are you going to go to the head of some Romanian Indian reservation tribe and say, hey, it's time for you guys to leave this planet? I don't know what that looks like politically. We go up and say to these guys, hey, you remember how we got a little bit better about those trees over the years? Now we actually honor some of them. We'd like to stop that completely, and we'd like you to move off the planet into this reservation we built for you on an O'Neill cylinder. I don't know what that looks like politically, but I don't see that happening very well. So, to my mind, it just makes more sense to build your nature preserves in space, in those space habitats where they're safe from invasive species, where you can control who goes into them, where there's no discussion about what the local ecology really should be or who owns what, because you just built the thing from scratch. It's there, I'd love to see people around them too, but I don't see Earth ever being evacuated from a nature preserve.
The uplifted elk on the O'Neill cylinder should not be approached because they are inherently dangerous. And that's that O'Neill, the one you don't go to.
Yeah. And you could have those. I mean, you could have, let's say 1,000 O'Neill cylinders would be a planet. That's not quite the right number, but you could have a group of 1,000 of them that will connect together for each million-year epoch of Earth's terrestrial origins that you decide you could replicate Jurassic Park style. And you still barely even, you're doing the equivalent of making one tiny little garden park on an entire planet in terms of what it would be to a Dyson swarm. These are tiny things compared to the size of those civilizations. And it doesn't have to be just the solar system either. You go build your native, big, safe, let's not tinker with that nature preserve, not in orbit of Earth, but out in the Kuiper Belt, where it can be safely protected and no one gets near it. And you could do things like that where you'd say, well, we're going to raise the money to build this thing and to pay for its, in trust, maintenance forever. And again, it's a contained environment. But you'd have a lot of those things for cultures and civilizations too. Those are trickier though, because while you could say, well, we decided we want to set this up as our new, with missionaries or pilgrims, say, this is going to be our new Jerusalem that we're building, and we're going to migrate there, and say, well, that's all good. You've set up this place that is your ideal civilization. Unfortunately, you had kids, and it wasn't their ideal civilization. So I think that is the kind of the disadvantage we're dealing with humans. We're trying to preserve a culture, but with animals, at least non-uplifted ones, that really shouldn't be as much of an issue.
All right, break time. I'll go and make us some more coffee.
Sounds good.
Isaac,
Yes, Anna?
have you ever considered unscience and futurism with Isaac Arthur? The option of having an AI assistant?
Anna, now we've discussed this. If you jump ship and come over to SFIA, what will John do? I've known him for a while now, and he really shouldn't be left to his own devices.
Anna, the coffee pot's on fire, and the possum made off with the creamer again.
He'll still have the possum, Isaac.
I think you're best off where you are.
Very well.
And here's part 2 of my interview with Isaac Arthur. It's that time of year, the end of the year. Isaac, what is the weather like in Ohio? Is it as bad as Missouri?
We got 2 feet of snow last week. And ironically, everyone who was like 5 miles to the south of us or 10 miles to the west got like none. So you're getting buried out. Like go out with the tractor and just like dig the house out. But right now it's like 50 degrees out and cold. But this is the good December weather. But we have times like in the northeast Ohio we'll get like 70 in the middle of January with no apparent Indian summer, I think we call it.
Yeah, same here. Same thing, except we usually get it 2 days earlier. But the same weather patterns. Right now, it's really cold outside. Now, my question for you to start this off is, all right, we often talk within SETI about detecting evidence of alien technosignatures, but maybe that's not quite the right approach in analyzing it. Maybe we should ask about what human technosignatures would be visible to an alien civilization. And the reality is it's not that much. So if you were an alien over 100 light years away, you're not going to see much. Mm-hmm. And if you're an alien 25 light years away, you're going to see some stuff, but it's going to be hard. So what do you think the most identifiable thing we do is right now?
Oh, it kind of gets tricky because one of the things we tend to forget out is I'll hear folks say, well, you can't hear a radio signal 1,000 light years away. It's like, well, you can. A quasar is a radio signal. You can hear those 1 billion light years away. It's all about intensity. But our loudest messages were like around the turn of the last century, because electricity was cheap and there was a lot of distance to cover, and they're also much clearer then. These days, the whole point of things like digital data compression is that you have something that repeats itself 100 times, so instead of repeating 100 times, you leave a note in your data that says, we repeat this 100 times at these locations. So the better you do your compression, the more it looks like noise. So the longer civilizations around, the more efficient they are at their savers, they're more at the data compression. It starts getting really hard to actually see anything. But I don't actually need to be able to read someone's email to know that they got email or that they have email. And the most visible thing with us, for instance, in terms of techno-signatures, as opposed to like atmospheric ones specifically, which are also visible, like too much carbon dioxide maybe, or things like that, is every day when North America swings by, there's all the people broadcasting radio on that frequency that's going to spike at that 24-hour interval. And then when Europe swings by, and then it's going to get to the Pacific Ocean and it's going to be dead, because almost half the planet is on that side where the Pacific Ocean's at, and there'll be a big sudden drop-off in this non-natural radio signal source. And so you don't necessarily know what it is, but you know it repeats every 24 hours. And you know that these things are repeating with some kind of frequency based on density. You might be able to map out the cities of a planet just by reading those radio signals as they come by. Winds rotating the way on and so forth. How good is your redshift calculation to see? Because in January, when the planet's on the other side of the sun, then it'll be in say, July, the redshift of those signals, very minimal though it is, it's still there. Moving was like 30 kilometers a second in the wrong direction of what you were earlier in that year. And that's a measurable redshift. So they can see these signals. I can't read them, but they change by that much. And so now I know how long the year is. I already know from looking at the planet what that was. You start being able to pick things like that up. And so if you can't read the signals, you can still read the noise, right? I don't have to be able to read everybody's signs in New York City to see what the signs out in front of the shops say. Here I am 50 miles away looking through a telescope. It looks like one big light glob to me. I don't need to be able to read those signs, though, to know that light glob is artificial, that's a techno-signature. And that's kind of what it would be with radio signals in that case. You can't read the individual ones, but you could read those. On the other hand, you have other techno-signatures that would be satellite grids, things like that, the GPS, things like that. You might be able to pick stuff like that up because they're very simple repeating signals, and you might know exactly what that is. There's a lot of things that if you can see them and are creative, you might be able to pick it out. Like we do with archaeology, we will find some, well, not archaeology, but someone who's been dead for 10,000 years, and we can examine the contents of their stomach. But there's a danger to that sort of thing, of course, is the inaccuracy. You say, well, because we opened up this guy's stomach who died 10,000 years ago, and we found this inside, we know what the diet of these people was. Say, well, that's not necessarily true, because you can't really assume that what the guy ate for the last day of their life was their normal diet. In fact, that's probably the day that's most likely to not be a mediocre example of what they could eat. They might have starved to death. They might have been exiled from their tribe and eating something else. They might have eaten something poisoned. They might be old and their teeth had rotted out, and all they eat now is corn mush. That's the problem you always have with this sort of approach of trying to figure things out from afar with intelligent creatures is, whether it's through time or space or both in the case of astronomy, how much can I really assume I'm right about in terms of these? So I crack our signals and we open them up, and now I'm listening to us, and I say, we figured out their language, and from this we determined that humans have claws, because they always talk about sticking their claws in people. They have 4 babies. They're a type of creature called a cat and a dog that they clearly keep around. And they, there's so many little things that we could just get wrong. Euphemisms are going to be mortal on translation. So there's so much room for error on things like that. And yeah, at the same time, there are all things you could pick out really amazingly from that in terms of techno-signatures.
Now, as we progress further into the 21st century and beyond, what are the next techno-signatures that we might emit as we begin to develop space that might become more visible to an alien civilization?
The one that when we talk about space colonization, we always talk about what can kickstart things off. With enough time, we should just develop into space the slow fashion of little improvements here or there. We always have these options for kickstarting the snowball effect. And you were talking maybe asteroid mining, one like that. Or maybe it's a gigantic project to blow up an asteroid that's coming towards Earth. Or one of my favorites these days is giant power collectors around the sun, around the Earth, to beam energy down to Earth through microwaves. Or, it's the cheap fix to, or cheapish fix to climate change issues. You put solar shades in front of Earth, right? Just a few to drop that down by 1% or so. That stuff gets very astronomically visible. It's going to be really obvious when you have orbiting panels around there, especially because it's technology. You kind of know what the good bits would be. So you'd be able to pick out things like they have these solar sails now around the planet that are blinking in every 12 hours, whereas the planet rotates every 24. And when we look at how much they're going around the planet, based on what we know of orbital mechanics, they are rotating exactly where they should be for that object. We're looking at a gigantic solar mirror. And that's a technosangel. That's a bam technosangel. Whether it's through occlusion or reflection or just changing it to an infrared spectrum, those get to be that. And beyond that, it's kind of hard. You start getting those kind of Kardashev scale cases where it's, well, we can spot this planet because it gives us so much more infrared radiation than it should. Or because this whole solar system is now not emitting normal sunlight and it's got all tabby star-like and it's got more infrared than you'd expect. But I'd say for the upcoming century, that would be the one I think would be most likely would be a large number of highly reflective or shady objects in orbit of Earth or at Lagrange, same difference.
Now, there is an object that you may or may not be aware of that is sitting within the annals of astronomy that looked really weird. In other words, it was a peculiar star named Chbyskovsky's star. HD 101, 105, I think was the classification. I could be wrong on that. But the star showed one measurement anyway. One group in Russia took a measurement years ago and saw transuranic elements, plutonium and above, and then along with really, really strange, hard to arrive elements as decay products like technetium and praseodymium and things like that. That has never been explained. That one has never been explained, but the observations haven't really been confirmed either. There's just been no work done with this star. But if that turned out to be the case, either we have some sort of weird nuclear hanky-panky that goes on in the universe involving the island of stability, or we have something else, something alien. Can you imagine a technosignature out of that? Why would someone do that?
Well, that's a tricky thing. It's like, let's say we're looking at the solar spectrum of a star and we're picking up plutonium in it. Why are you making something as valuable as plutonium, which is valuable even in like a fusion economy? That's still really handy stuff. Why are you dumping that into the surface of your sun? You know, it's one of those examples where it wouldn't quite make sense.
Yeah.
Now, plutonium does come into existence naturally. It just doesn't last very long. Here we talk about, well, there's all the stuff on Earth was made, 4.5 billion years ago in some supernova. No, it wasn't just one anyway. It was multiple, but it would have been more like one that was principally 6 billion years ago. So long before that stuff even got anywhere near our solar system, everything that had a half-life of less than millions of years was gone. You have many things that would have been created, though, that are only appearing in labs, but they never would have survived long enough to even get outside the supernova because they only last for, a few nanoseconds. But there could be effects where it's actually creating something like breeder reactor effect. I don't know how that would happen with plutonium on the surface of the star. And again, the key there is to confirm that observation. But you could have plutonium naturally occurring on a planet. You just have to have some reason why you have a naturally occurring breeder reactor. But otherwise, you say, so you never want to assume one thing by itself is a technosangel. As we said, well, lots of oxygen on a planet, when it's the point that we have it, that's got to be a biosangel sign of life because oxygen doesn't like to stick around free for very long. Say, well, let's not jump to the conclusion that you can't have a very high amount of oxygen without life there. There's a number of effects that could cause that too. And so it's never really a question of what we're seeing. Sometimes a single phenomena is itself proof enough. Right? If you have a UFO land on the front lawn and guys get out there with little green men, yes, that is probably aliens. You don't have to argue that one too much. You still need to consider the possibility that there's a hoax or a fake, but that's not one of those things like, this might be natural. It's a giant flying saucer. It's not natural. In cases, though, where it's a technosangel or a biosangel, if it's not really obvious that this thing is alive, you should always be looking for two unrelated phenomena from the same area. New York City, we're talking about that as I can see not the individual signs that are written there, but I can see the big glowing artificial light source in the middle of the night. That could be a technosangel. But if all I see is that light, I'm just saying, well, what could that naturally be? Something could be creating that effect naturally. But then I turned my radio on, and I'm getting a bunch of radio channels being emitted from there that are patterned. That's a completely unrelated phenomenon that's also technosangel. Now I have two high probability examples of technosangel. Also, they seem to have weird concrete rivers running into place. That's a technosangel. The buildings are technosangels. In almost any case where you'd see technology in play, there should be multiple ones. You might only be able to see one initially to find it, but you should be able to start zooming in on them pretty soon thereafter. That doesn't mean if you only find one example, you don't say, well, this is clearly not artificial. No, you investigate it more. So you never want to be too casual about dismissing something as a natural phenomenon. The key thing is the phenomenon is going to be interesting. It might be artificial. But you don't really want to go that. That shouldn't be your first place to go. You shouldn't be afraid to go to it either, though. I mean, you remember what it was like even 10 years ago. If you were in the sciences and you went to the aliens as a possibility, you might as well go ahead and then put the crazy hat on some people's eyes. That's where most of us went to it first. Like when Tabby Star came out, I didn't think it was aliens or megastructurals. But one of the first things that went through my head is, could it be? And I went through the reasons why I didn't think it was. It's what I do with any of these phenomena. What would this be like if it was artificial life? That's normal for scientists to go through. So it's okay to think that through, but at the same time, we do have to be careful with this one technosignature, this one biosignature is a strong indicator of life, because it probably, if it's by itself and isolated, isn't.
Corroborating technosignatures would be useful.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately, I think, how it would eventually get nailed, is that after X amount of time, probably a long time, and we saw one technosignature and then confirmed it with radio, which of course SETI does. Tabby Star was a target in those days, and they swung the Allen telescope array towards it to see if there was any radio coming off it. And the one creepy thing about that is that there was a very brief time during the early days of Tabby Star where there was a report of a detection of, I believe it was laser light. And it turned out that the detector in question was hit by a cosmic ray, and it was best explained as not being that. But that was actually a time in that story, which I thought I always did think, I spoke about it extensively on YouTube, but I always did think that this is probably going to turn out dust, some strange phenomenon of dust and, a collisional model. And that's sort of backed up nowadays, is that it does look like some kind of collisional model. But that for that one brief period, there was a second little detection there. And I think that's what's going to happen, how it unfolds and how we eventually discover alien life, is that it'll be very distant, doing something we don't quite understand, but there'll be 2 points of evidence that say, yeah, this is probably what this is. What I worry about, though, is that if that's it, that's all we ever know, is just what we can glean from those 2 points, and that's it. That's all we ever know about that alien civilization.
Something like a K3 civilization around another galaxy, you're going to pick it up by its infrared radiation and by the fact that there's just a ton of background radiation and certain preferred frequencies, and that's what you're going to see. And you're not going to be able to make out any of those signals. And it's just going to be the big wall of text. You can see the libraries there, but you can't read any of it. And you're not going to be able to send a signal and say, can you tell us more? There's not going to be any way to see an individual megastructure in play either. But, I would say in cases like that, it's going to be, you see it, and it's that one lone technosignature, but it's so blatantly obvious. It's the driving into town, and there's a big sign that says, "Welcome to New York City." You're like, oh, that's the freakiest, totally naturally occurring tree I've ever seen. No. Or it's going to be a case where it looks like it, and then you probe it a bit more, because you're like, that could be. Probably isn't, but it couldn't be. And you follow it up and say, now we got a second point, that corroborating technosignature, and that might be it. That might be all you ever get. But I think if it's anything inside this galaxy that we could talk to, we'll be able to get more than that. It'll be one of those situations where if there's a real chance for communication, then it should be possible to get a lot of additional corroborating ones. But if they're a billion light years away and they're on some other galaxy where they're building their gigantic mega empire or built it a billion years ago, and it's probably still flooding out, it's not really a civilization, it's just a massive diaspora of ever more divergent civilizations from that one place, we're never going to talk to them. Maybe if that's the one thing you're willing to devote your entire next 10 billion years of existence to, you can build a giant spaceship and launch yourself towards the leading edge of their civilization, so you can get out 10 billion years later at the edge of the universe and say, hey, I've been wanting to meet you guys for so long. And they say, oh, okay, welcome. We saw signs of you astronomically too. I'm surprised you made that trip. It's...
Yeah. Well, what I worry about, though, too, within the search for technosignatures, is that I think, after doing this for as long as I have, I think there is still a danger that will, do exactly what you said. You see the sign for New York City and you say, that's the weirdest tree I've ever seen. Or conversely, I've used the example of finding the Pepsi bottle and saying, that's the weirdest clam I have ever seen, and missing it when it was there the entire time, and that we might just be a little too stringent and maybe a little too averse to follow up in order to actually nail a technosignature.
And we have to be careful in skepticism. Like, when you're dealing with, like, this could be an axe head, a stone axe head, it's like, yeah, that's because it's a very simple piece of stone that got sharpened, and maybe when it was naturally coined that way, it looks pretty natural because it's pretty close to it is. You don't have that happen when you walk into someone's workshop, and yet, you and I are both on the skeptic side of the phenomenology chart, but we both know some people get, the skepticism goes a little bit too far, and it's like, well, it's not that I disagree with where you're getting to the answer. On the other hand, you're really stretching on some of these points to find a way to dismiss them very casually that isn't necessarily all that logical. It may or may not be natural, it may or may not be, but you don't know yet from that point. You still need to be open-minded at this stage. I say there's a big difference between somebody saying, well, this case of the ghost existing has been disproven, or it has been counterindicated, versus just saying, I don't believe in them, period. And say, well, I don't believe in them either, but I don't want to make too many assumptions that every last eyewitness example of this is completely wrong either, right? I don't have enough evidence to say that yet. As just an example, same for Bigfoot. You don't counterindicate Bigfoot by saying that every observer of him was lying or is a false witness. You say, well, where was Bigfoot's relatives? Where are the tribes of Big Feet out there? But in the case like that, you can always find an example where it wouldn't make sense, because you could say, well, what if Bigfoot was a naturally occurring immortal creature from an earlier offset of humanity, and he's the last of his kind, and he just has gotten very good at hiding in his thousands of years of life? You can say that about alien civilization. You might have somebody who is that kind of example, where the alien civilization itself was far apart and died long ago, and all that's left behind are those bits that were really good at surviving and really determined to do so, and they might not act terribly normally. You might have some great civilization that fell eons ago, and all that's left over are those ones who are so obsessed with living that they are basically insane about it. And they're quiet, and they hide, and they're pathological, and you only ever bump into them in the most bizarre formats because they're not normal. Maybe the civilization ascended to a higher plane of existence, or they just had existential dread and they died off. And we have to factor things like that into it when we're thinking about it, because so much of our approach to trying to see where aliens' life would be at, we like, how would we do it in their shoes? And not just because we're human. We say, well, how would a civilization of social creatures that was into technology and personal survival and growth as a civilization, how would they act? And that's not really the same as something we're like, well, how would an AI that was the remnants like Skynet act? How would Skynet act after it succeeded in wiping out the humans? Where does Skynet go on day 22 after the humans are completely gone? What's it up to now? What's it do? What's it look like in a Fermi paradox context?
Padded room aliens, where they're so interested in their longevity and their life extension technology and everything else that they take no risk. And they simply do not broadcast anything because that might alert others to their presence. They might not take any risks. They may get rid of all vehicular traffic or anything that any way you could die, and that their whole reason for being is living as long as they possibly can, because that's what you should do in a universe where it's possible to die.
When your actuarial tables tell you a certain behavior is going to get you killed, you tend to start doing it. And that thing which has a 1 in a million chance of happening in a given year is not something you and I waste our time dealing with, but it's something whose natural lifespan is 1 million years. That's a terrifying thing that's killing half of them. It's the thing that our ancestors didn't care about because they never lived to be 70, but now wipes us out. To them, anything that has a chance, like we talk about, they'd have a finite chance of believing that one day humans might be a threat to them, this AI or this alien, so they have to wipe us out because, while there's a chance of peaceful coexistence, there is a finite chance that we would attack and destroy them if we lived. And that odds should go up the longer that we're around, because we get better at doing it if we survive. So they must attack us and kill us off. There's lots of flaws to that concept, but it's been used in fiction, for instance. But if you are an AI that is out there in the universe and you're basically making decisions against the idea that you plan to live for 1 trillion or quadrillion years, and the physics lets you do that, your analysis of how to act and behave changes a lot. And one of those is, it doesn't really behoove you to make intelligent copies of yourself to spread to other solar systems, because they're not you in any way. They are competition. They are divergent from you, and they have the same, essentially narcissistic focus on in the universe. All that matters is me, and why am I going to make a copy of myself who I know is going to act the exact same way? And so that comes up with space colonization as one of those Fermi paradox solutions I tend to like better, though I don't think it works, is that people decide that there are no aliens in their galaxy that are a threat to them. There's no reason to try to talk to them because they don't exist, but they do know that they could easily create a bunch of hostile alien borders by colonizing those areas around them. And in many ways, colonizing the neighboring star systems doesn't really benefit you economically. You might be able to do what I suggested earlier, which is like you can have them ship home hydrogen or metals, but that gigantic supply shipped home from them that might extend your civilization a quadrillion years has to be taken in the kind of context of how many centuries or millennia is it going to be before I have a war with these people? I mean, if you've had Alpha Centauri and us as neighbors for 1 million years, there's almost bound to have had to have been some kind of turf conflict during that time, even if we had really good relations most of the time. The US and Britain are great friends and allies. We've still been to war together twice. Put that across 1 million years, and that comes a little bit different. But then you're thinking, well, these neighboring colonies, we don't have a shared cultural gum with them. They're divergent. They're a bunch of dirty mutants. I don't want them on my border. And that could very easily be how many civilizations choose to look at space colonization is, what do we really get out of this except to plant an entire galaxy all around us in every direction full of hostile bordering neighbors? I don't think that really works out, but that is a possibility for how many might view it, and that's very true if you're something like a Skynet or an individual singular lone intelligence that really has no tendency to want to have social friends and neighbors and kids.
I think, though, there eventually becomes somewhat of an issue, and that is the universe begins to age, and it might be that at some point other civilizations start to seek each other out, specifically so they can sort of combine resources and try to survive as long as you can in a dying universe. Mm-hmm. Do you foresee that? Or the distance problem, the universe has just expanded too much and nobody's going to ever come into contact with each other at the end of the universe.
I mean, I think it's called the grabby aliens hypothesis nowadays, is the idea that there's probably several thousand, it could be a little bit less, a little bit more, but several thousand, not even K3 civilizations, but beyond that, K4 civilizations that would probably, as a whole, because some of them would start earlier and get more and others would be less, as a whole, they don't get a certain number of stars, they get a certain number of galaxies, and maybe millions of galaxies individually to each of those civilizations. You think thousands of alien empires, each of whom has millions of galaxies themselves, as a reminder of just how big the universe really is. And in that kind of context, those civilizations have no reason to even contact each other because they are interesting astronomical phenomena at that point in time. They're never going to run into each other. They know that. And if they do, it's not going to be there's no giant empire back at the other end of the galaxy doing some kind of invasion push on you. Because again, you barely even can communicate with your fringe. When they are 1 million light years away to the edge of your border, between your homeworld and that's close, 1 million light years. What are you reinforcing them with? Nothing. What technology do they have? They're not getting anything from you. It's 1 million years old on a patch. Do you care what happens to them? No, you don't know they exist yet because the signal from them, the signal from the guys who colonized their planet, letting you about how they colonized that planet 10,000 years ago, those people came from, still hasn't gotten home yet. You don't know that they exist, and you don't really care that much. And the fact there's a war there means nothing to all the people on the fringe. It's a huge border, millions of years across, and there's no real reason why there would be those kind of conflicts. So again, those other grabby civilizations would just be, an astronomical phenomenon. But inside your local cluster of galaxies, which might be as big as a supercluster because you can actually move whole galaxies together if you really want to. So you don't just say have the 30 or 40 that we have gravitationally bound. You might keep an entire supercluster together. There's a reason to cooperate and keep resources together, in large part because it's really hard to steal from each other. When you have civilizations hanging around black holes or things like that, they have time to react. And when you do, you can enact a scorched earth policy. Very literal way. You say, look, we know what you want. We know you're going to try to steal our resources, and we're going to dump them all down this black hole if you take us. They would just follow down that. Say, well, I guess I still have the energy from that left over. Or I say, we're going to use it all, just shoot off as a big gas that you can't even collect. We're going to vaporize ourselves if you win. So you get nothing. And all of your neighbors are going to see what you did because there's no secrecy there. And everything takes thousands of years to accomplish. So I think in that context, you don't really have I mean, you have radiant on board the same space habitat on board the same solar system, but at the galactic stage, you can't really cannibalize resource off other people forcefully, maybe coercively in terms of trade deals, of course. So I think you're right there that you probably would have civilizations trying to cooperate to last longer, but to what degree? Every technology should be discovered by the time the galaxy is even colonized, I think. 1,000,000 years of technology is a lot. And I mean, if you've been doing new science constantly and without stop like we do now for 1,000,000 years, and you still haven't found a patch to entropy, that doesn't seem unlikely. So you probably either maxed out your technology, or you found an answer to things like entropy at that point. I don't know if they have all that many reasons to cooperate, though, other than they have no real reason to fight wars with each other. But I don't think they have a lot of advantages to befriending each other much either. Just that kind of passive relationship of people who have no particular hatred of each other and live thousands of light years apart with no real connection other than we can trade occasional notes on science and articles and entertainment to keep ourselves from getting bored.
Technosignatures of war. One of the biggest questions I get asked on my channel in regards to technosignatures is, what would a war look like, and could they see our wars? And I generally don't think that they could. Not anything we do right now. But is there an intergalactic war technosignature that is worthwhile looking for?
I've wondered about that a lot, and I mean, they're all interstellar ones. You could see the effect of like an intentional Kessler syndrome effect. That's a technosignature, for instance, Kessler syndrome. Although it's one of those examples where it could very easily destroy, any asteroid impact on a planet has a chance of looking like a Kessler event for a while. But you'll be able to start noticing on the spectrometry, wow, there's a lot of metal in here for what we'd expect. And that says that's a Kessler syndrome effect instead of being just an asteroid. You can have that at the solar scale when you've got like a Dyson swarm where thing blows up like that too. Now you can see things like a Niko Dyson being kind of your Death Star effect going on when it tries to torch planets from half a galaxy away. Things like that are visible, but I think that the civilizations that, the idea that the weapons are somehow more visible than the civilization itself, I don't think that really holds up. Could you see a nuclear bomb blast from space? Yes, it's a very bright event. What we talk about is like for a moment, it's though the sun, a second sunrise happened. Well, yeah, but only for a few miles all around. It's really not that bright. So you have a nuclear bomb blast. Is that astronomically observable? Yes, yeah. But it's not that it outshines the planet. It's just that if you got equipment that's sensitive enough to be able to see 1% of 1% change in Earth's illumination for a moment, yes, and some weird frequencies you wouldn't expect and concentrated. Assuming you have the resolution for that, I think the missing factor is when you're looking at a planet, it's exactly 1 pixel. You need some very high resolution to get more than a pixel, and what you're telling about is it's that 1 pixel has a different color or different brightness. That's the only role. Like a nuclear bomb is a disproportionately bright object compared to a lot of other ones. I think then, of course, we have to consider other types of weapons and what does it look like when they're going to war. You could see some very strange effects like intentional GRBs. And that could be an example of how you detected a civilization was all of a sudden this galaxy that we're looking at starts having a lot of gamma ray bursts. But what is all of a sudden? If they're fighting a galaxy-wide war without FTL, all of a sudden means over the course of your 100,000-year observation window of this galaxy, you saw twice the number of GLBs what you expect when they briefly weaponize things. So they should be visible, but again, the civilization that makes the nuclear bomb is more visible than the nuclear bomb. The civilization that makes a Dyson swarm or accidentally set off Kessler syndrome should be more visible than the effect, I'd say.
I think the one that I found the most interesting is that a post-war, catastrophic massive war might result in a very dramatic rise in methane levels as vegetation and everything rots as a result of it. The problem, of course, is that's a very transient signal. You'd need to see it within a very short time, or else it would become invisible again.
They're harder on some stars too, because it's like if it's on a red dwarf world, then yeah, less ultraviolet light stuff has a longer dwell time. But if it's on a more like a type A star, it's going to be very short. But there will be signatures of it. It's just the problem is a lot of times they'd only be visible to you if you really knew what you were looking for because you already made contact and had a lot of good examples, or because it's the place you're looking at. Like there's such a difference between trying to detect a war on a planet that you already know as a civilization exists versus, we were looking through random locations and said, haha, that was a war. I think that you could tell that are your neighbors who you watch like a hawk, the other alien empires that a war was going on. But I don't think that's how you'd spot them.
I think it would be exceedingly difficult.
I mean, with the obvious caveat that there might be weapons or technologies that are really obvious. Like, what kind of things they do for their war? Well, we watched 5,000 stars that are none of them in the right class mass all blew up as supernovae. And there are ways you can set a supernova off a star that's not the right mass. You can slam a pair of like giant iron balls into it through the poles, and when they hit in the middle, it's going to detonate that star. It doesn't matter that it doesn't have enough mass to do it normally. So
that would be the ultimate technosignature.
Yeah.
That would be utterly terrifying if you saw a supernova from a star that shouldn't be possible to go supernova.
Yeah, and I mean that's a fair point to say. Well, I don't know if we detect them by their weapons, but I would say that if that's how you detect them, that's definitely a scary way to find out if someone exists.
Well, but there's also a peaceful way to do that, because imagine, for example, if you knew that the star Betelgeuse was going to go supernova. You were aware of it, and you knew exactly when. You'd been able to study it and make predictions on exactly when it was. And at the moment that star went naturally supernova, all of a sudden a star some distance from it that shouldn't go supernova goes supernova as well. And there, voila, there's an alien civilization saying hello in a very novel way. But since all the astronomers in the Milky Way know that Betelgeuse is going to go supernova, when they see it and they see a concurrent event, that might be a very efficient way. Although even still, we're slamming two pieces of iron into a star at the poles is just that's hard. But assuming they could do that, that's a really, really easy way to announce to the entire galaxy that has science that you exist.
And I mean, but one that might take a little while for them to find out about, to be fair, too. I think I get a lot of folks who will say that, who reach out, I was like, well, you're talking about aliens, Isaac, but I've actually talked to some of them. And one guy, without going into details, he was claiming he was speaking to them psychically. And I said, well, I will take this seriously if you can have him just tell me where the next location of any nova is going to be in the next, wherever he's at. If he's light years away, it's instantaneous. There are nova almost every week or so that you'd be able to see. Anything inside that range, just tell me one of them is going to show up. Well, you should be able to see someone from his angle where it's already visible to them, but not yet visible to us, and transmit that information to us. And that would be proof positive. That's the easy way to prove that. So anything that scale is causing something artificial, that's a techno-signature. But the idea that, it doesn't have to be a weapon either. You might set off artificial supernovae for the purpose of clearing an area out to massively create new amounts of material, or to make a black hole because you really want a black hole. Those are very valuable pieces of real estate themselves if you got them, and we know to position them because they make such handy ramps in terms of stellar travel is pretty neat too. So there was a lot of ways that you could do some big scale engineering to be visible like that. But again, in that case, if you have the ability to make supernovae for weapons' sake, again, I can instantly think of easier ways to do that in a peaceful environment that is actually much more valuable to your civilization, that would be much more visible. You could also do some messed up things with one, like they always say, well, we know nova's going to happen pretty soon, and we have nova, we say, how long does a radio signal last? We get these nova that are very short and minor ones, and towards their brightness, that can be periodic in nature because it's getting gas from its neighbor, and they rotate around each other every X period of time, and there's a little bit of an extra buildup based on the period of those two orbiting each other. It would not be that hard to intentionally dump material on there at a specific patterned rate and say, instead of being like once every couple of days, instead it goes 3, 1, 4, 5, 9, and then that's, if you're talking the digits of pi being typed out on the surface of a star, yeah, that's a techno-signature.
Yeah, that would be a really good, and that's actually really, if you think about it, that's not that hard of a techno-signature.
No.
I mean, that might actually be easier to do than like an Arnold blooper, ultimately.
I think that's one of the reasons why I'm forming parents say, well, maybe we couldn't see them. I say, there are so many ways I can think to make contact and make yourself very well known to people. And that's only through casual thought, I'm sure they come up with much better ones. If you want people to know that you exist and are intelligent, it ain't hard. If they are intelligent. Intelligence knows intelligence. And so again, if you're telegraphing everything by typing out mathematical formulae on the surface of novae, yes, that works. And yes, that is visible anywhere in the galaxy, and really it's visible in other galaxies too. You know, you can see supernovae in other galaxies. You can see novae in other galaxies too, for that matter. And that's where you start getting to the point where, say, if they really want to be heard, they can make it happen. It doesn't matter how distorted the signal gets, because you can always just go for the really blight semaphore method of just pulsing a star.
Yeah, and there's been others, stellar tickling, for example, bombarding them with neutrinos. I mean, there has just been, within the last 10 years, there's just been an explosion of thought into technosignatures and papers. And I mean, arXiv is a treasure trove of envisioning potential technosignatures. And I can't shake the feeling that when we see one, we're going to recognize it, but maybe it's something that we haven't even thought of yet.
Oh, yes. And we can be very biased by our own things on this. We would probably recognize if we saw it, even if we hadn't thought of it. But at the same time, you know, the example I use for artificial intelligence so often with the Asimov case of, well, it's going to be humanoid robot butlers and they're going to be slaves, there's going to be an issue. And say, well, we needed that because you had a humanoid smart robot because you needed something that could understand the orders we were issuing it, so it had to be as smart as us. And someone goes by and says, well, why don't we just teach humans how to talk to the machine that's really stupid instead? I don't need a horse that's as smart as me to ride. I need to be smart enough to explain to the horse what it needs to do, as opposed to trying to get the horse to figure out what I want it to do. And so we get Roomba. I don't need a android or humanoid robot to go around and vacuum my floor with a vacuum cleaner. I need a really stupid robot to do that job. But it biases us. We tend to assume all AI was human, when it makes a lot more sense to have AI that's not even as smart as an insect in most cases, and certainly not anything that's smarter than a mammal. And that's the same kind of things, those same kind of biases could be what gets us with something like space travel, because it might be so obvious that we could never have possibly have caught on the really obvious background radiation in the galaxy of this frequency. And you say, well, there's cosmic microwave background radiation. That's not the only type of background radiation there is in the galaxy, and a lot of it's in X-rays or UV. That could be the telltale signatures of people's starship drives in some cases. You know, let's say I'm using a black hole drive, classic Hawking radiation spaceship that weighs around a megaton. Those are great if you can make them. That's almost as good as antimatter and a lot safer. It's weird to think of a black hole as safe, but compared to antimatter, yes. And what's the back end of that ship look like? Well, it's shooting gamma rays out at a certain frequency. And say, well, we can say that those don't exist then because we don't see that frequency. We don't know that that's what's actually coming out the back end of this particular one, though. It could be that they intentionally filter that through to use it as a power source, and then it comes out as like hard X-rays. So it could be a really obvious technosignature that they just assume everyone figures out. And the other thing is to say, why am I trying to reach out to people in a Fermi paradox context? Why am I looking for the technosignatures? Am I planning to send missiles their way? That's why I'm looking for them? Okay, well, why wait till there's technology there? Look for the biosignatures instead, because there's been for millions and billions of years of war. Or maybe it's so they don't blow themselves up. And that was a big one. A lot of our early thinking on the Fermi paradox was how quickly you Space Forces blow yourself up. That's Cold Warrior thought. We made the H-bomb. We're like, well, better get all eggs out of one basket. Well, the reality is getting your eggs off Earth doesn't really increase the odds of survival of the species that much. We do say that, but it's mostly poetic. We don't really need to lead the solar system to survive. And they might, think, why do I need to rush to contact these people using some technology and method like we were saying, dumping matter on a nova? That's pretty resource intensive, and it might be well inside their wheelhouse, but at the same time, just because I can go and set an oil dike on fire here, and certainly the U.S. or planetary economy can afford to do that, I don't need to heat my house that way or use that as the beacon light to let people know I'm around. And they might say, well, that's what they could detect when they're brand new like us, but the reasoning there is they're 10,000 light years away from us, whatever it is. They don't expect to get a message from us very quickly. They don't really care if they don't hear from us for a couple more centuries. That's the way it is. They don't wait millions of years for us to pop up as a civilization. They only need to do that if they're worried we're going to kill ourselves off. But we're still here. And they might tend to feel like the relatively rare number of civilizations that do that are kind of their own problem, especially because we realize there's really no way humanity could have wiped themselves out during the Cold War. We didn't have enough bomb for that. We could have just set ourselves back for a couple of centuries, which again, on the galactic stage means nothing. So they might say, well, look, it's not something they're going to figure out for a couple more centuries, but they're going to figure out this one technosignature beacon method that's just inevitable. They're going to figure it out in a couple of centuries, maybe 50 years, maybe 500, whatever it is. Then they can hear us, and we pay $1 a day to keep that transmitter on, versus the one that you want to build that they'll be able to see a whole whoppy 100 years earlier that's going to cost $1 million a minute to run. So let's go back with $1 a day cheap one, because I don't really need to talk to the humans that much. We'll hear from them later on.
Indeed. My last question for you today is this. You mentioned the Roomba, and that is the finest example in my life of adopting a technology that turned out to be disastrous. I owned a Roomba, and it's now locked in my closet because I tripped over it twice in the middle of the night walking to the bathroom. What, in your view as a futurist, is the most dangerous technology we are pursuing today? Is there something we do other than things like what we already have, hydrogen bombs, things like that? What is the most damaging, dangerous thing we are doing right now in technological development if you project it out, say, 20, 25 years?
It's tricky. My Roomba's stuck underneath my couch right now. But it's a good example. Yeah, mine's stuck in the couch.
Yeah, the Roomba was, I don't trust it. I don't trust the Roomba. I like it, but more like one would set a drone flying around the house every so often for entertainment. But what I'm worried about is things like, well, what sort of robotic soldiers is the military developing, and what control do we have over them? Things like that. In the near term, though, what is the most dangerous sector in technology development you think we're pursuing?
Well, coincidentally, the last episode I wrote that's not going to come out till February was super soldiers. But that's a tricky one, because to me, it's got to be something that has a chance to actually really expose us to the possibility of extinction or permanent cycle down. And so we could use the example of something like virtual reality. I don't see VR as a big threat to humanity any more than I thought Nintendo was, though I think people made the mistake of at the same time saying that could be really dangerous, or, oh no, don't worry, that's not the problem for us at all. People are never going to get addicted to video games. That would never cause social problems. As we find out, the answer was somewhere in the middle there. What could actually threaten humanity's existence almost has to be something existential. Yes, it could be an artificial intelligence that replaces things like that, but we're pretty smart and pretty good at survival. I feel like we'll probably manage to avoid that one. But what if we find something that basically just causes us to erode? And something like, what if we had something that made crystal meth and heroin and cocaine all put together feel like it was, like no more impressive than hot chocolate? Something that was just so much better than that was insane. How long did your civilization survive at that point in time? Or neurohacking is an example of that. We say one way to treat the opioid crisis might be that we could find some way to just shut off that addiction center. At the same time, we could go the other way where it says, I got this wonderful technology that lets us cure any addiction, but the exact same technology lets me stick a little wire in your head and turn you into a complete addict. And I mean, that was something that Niven explored in this Ringworld series, Larry Niven's Ringworld series. The second book, one of our protagonists finds themselves addicted to basically a pleasure-inducing or euphoria-inducing wire in the head. It's really cheap. It's really easy. And that is probably a technological option that's there. But I tend to feel like things like that tend to self-select out, because not everyone's going to go in for something like that simultaneously. And, so like, let's say 1% of the population gets addicted to that. Well, then a large portion of the population swears off it completely. They're not going to come near it, and they're not going to get interested in it. No matter how good you tell them it is, they're never going to try it. And they're the ones who survive. And they pass that bias on to their kids. So I feel like a lot of those options are not there. And the same would apply to something like, well, let's say somebody came out tomorrow with a hard proof that free will was absolutely an illusion or a lie. And if you read the proof, why, you would never, ever, ever believe that. You would instantly assume free will didn't exist, and the whole civilization collapses. A lot of people who are just going to refuse to read that thing, and as people start falling over dead from existential horror, they're going to say, it's a lie. Burn every copy of that book, as well as everybody who's like passing around, burn them too. And now it's gone, So I think in a lot of ways we are incredibly resilient against things like that, and that to me is probably the reason why I tend to be so optimistic about the future. There's no real option for me for wiping us out completely, not because it couldn't happen, but because every time I think of something that is a huge threat to us, I can think of a way where relatively sane people could work to prevent that. And then, I suppose, on the other hand, I would say if relatively sane people can't prevent that, I can think of lots of ways in which people who were relatively insane could also prevent that as a failback, fail-safe option. But if everyone's addicted to this wonderful new thing that makes so much sense to use, the crazy people who refuse to use it are the ones who survive. That wonderful new power generator that we thought was the magical cure to all of our problems was actually a portal to another universe, and we don't realize or not, it's been filling us with some kind of instability. It's going to blow us up, or it's going to give us all cancer in some way we didn't know, or it's opening us up to an alien invasion. But there will be those people who refuse to use it, even though it made no sense to you because they're crazy, and they survive. There's the advantage to spreading out and diversifying. Again, to use that example of Mario getting your eggs out of one basket. But there are things that could take us out, but they'd have to be fast.
They'd have to be fast. Those are my conclusions as well. Every time I think through the scenarios of human extinction, I really can only come up with two that might do it. One is the asteroid, of course.
Yeah.
But we're getting close to a period, as what the DART mission showed, we're getting close to being able to deflect and mitigate. The other is if we just went through some catastrophic drop in population and got it in our head that it's better to go extinct, and we simply stopped reproducing. Those were the only two that I could ever identify that had legs.
I think that then there's let's say for an asteroid impact and something like that is to us right now, an asteroid impact is a calamity. To a civilization a couple centuries from now, an asteroid bound towards Earth is an economic boom, waiting to happen. But with the kind of Malthusian situation there, because we heard people talking about, well, maybe we should voluntarily go extinct. That doesn't really work out too well, because you have people who were in favor of doing that, potentially they might do that, but then you have the ones who were very opposed to it, who should still be around, and they should grow more numerous with time and tend to be a bit more impactful. But the other aspect of that is, we see population decline in certain places in terms of the growth rates, but we have to remember, we've been telling people for over a century now that we were kind of pushing our numbers, that we were at maximum density. And it's mostly those places that have been saying that the loudest that have the lowest birth rates. Places that were kind of already overpopulated. A lot of them were colonial places that were bringing a lot of their food in from outside areas. They had weak jugular veins exposed from shipping, for instance. And that's mostly been happening because we have a mixture of technologies that make it easier to not have kids on accident, while also telling people that they really shouldn't be trying to have tons of kids. That can change very quickly if the population is seen to... let's say tomorrow we get a replacement for fossil fuels. It's cheap enough now to manufacture them through the sommelier process to make fossil fuels out of thin air through carbon dioxide reduction. Let's say that we get really good solar panels and we get much better agricultural technology, and so they say, well, we don't have to worry about sustainability for a bit. Now the narrative changes and people say, well, let's have more kids. So I kind of think that in all these cases we have to remember that we can't just assume that the trend for population right now or in the future is going to stay the same, because the circumstances can change. What people's priorities are can change. And, I remember doing one time when they were talking about population decline, all the bigger countries all had population decline. So, well, off the top of my head, the countries that should have the highest GDP per capita should have the lowest birth rate, and vice versa, if that's true. So let's check it that way. And so I looked it all up in the CIA World Factbook, like 200 countries, looked up the top 10 for each of those categories and looked at the bottom 10. I said, just by random chance, there should be one or two of them that were on there. To my surprise, there wasn't a single case where one of the top 10 GDP per capita countries actually had one of the bottom 10 population growth rates, and vice versa. So it was actually worse than random in terms of proving the idea that prosperity means you have less kids. We were looking at a kind of series of perspectives that are limited to the current technology and era. Let's say we get a better technology that allows us to live longer. Well, people start having kids later in life. The technology for that is very close. So, and again, that's one of those examples. Kind of go off on a rabbit trail there. Almost any time I can think of something that could wipe out humanity, while there is the window for it to happen, there's just so many things that would change that once you get attention focused on it. So it has to be that fast asteroid, a black hole swings to the area, or an alien armada shows up, and then it's those thin windows of time.
And then there is, within that thought, the sort of very tricky thought of artificial reproduction, cloning, and custom humans that maybe the natural humans choose to breed not so much, but if we need more people, then there are entities on this earth that would have no problem making them.
Yeah. And it could easily be something that starts happening very soon, too, because, say, a lot of people, they want to have a career and they want to have a family, and they're feeling like they have to choose between the two. Well, if you can have your child grown in, well, we say a vat, but it's more likely to be a Ziploc bag based on how those experiments go. You just grown and you're 50 and you have a baby now, and it's your baby. Okay. There are ways that technology made the population rate decline because we had birth control technology pop up. Well, what happens when you have fertility technologies pop up too? Now it expands. Does that really indicate an infinite trend? No, it's a local change specific to cultural time and tech.
Our biggest coming problem is not our own extinction, but rather our ethics and how we manage those. And that is the direction we go. Isaac, it was great as usual. We'll do this again, our usual yearly get together. And it was fun as usual, man. So I look forward to next time, and I'll be in touch.
Always a pleasure, John. Thanks for having me on.
Event Horizon and my channel are now available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube memberships. Early ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and sleep-focused content. Sign up now by clicking the links below to your platform of choice. Anna, why is the opossum delivering me a letter?
I don't know, John.
Wait a minute. It's postmarked from the new shed the possum built in the backyard. It's from the Loch Ness Monster. I'm going out there.
Can I help you?
You don't sound very Scottish.
Yes, I'm a migratory species. I spent summers in Lake Erie. I wrote you to inform you that I'm a skeptic and I'm unconvinced that humans exist. I mean, really, a primate without fur? Preposterous. The opossum is equally skeptical.
Wait a minute. I'm standing here right in front of you.
That proves nothing.
It wasn't at all obvious that Isaac Arthur played the Loch Ness Monster, John.